Well, we're really pleased to be here. The timing of us talking to you is very good because, Laura, Donna, and Martin both mentioned the relationship handbook. Well, we wanted to write an addition to it for the 25th anniversary of it. So in order to do that, we had to step back and think about what we've learned in the meantime and what we feel like is the most important things that we said in the relationship handbook. So what we had to do was to, in order to do that writing, was to boil everything down to some really simple points. And there's the point that if we were on our deathbed and our grandchildren were talking to us and saying, "Grandma, Grandpa, you only have a few minutes to live. Can you tell us about relationships, something, just something short that would be helpful?" What we would say at this point is goodwill. Goodwill. Goodwill is absolutely the only thing you need for a relationship to evolve. Now, the opposite of goodwill is having an adversarial relationship. So goodwill, when you have goodwill, you have like a partnership with your spouse, with your mate. Or if you're at work, you have a feeling of partnership with your boss, you have a feeling of partnership with your colleagues, you have a feeling of partnership with the people that work for you. Okay? Now, when you have a feeling of partnership, it's like very healthy soil. And flowers, plants grow out of it, healthy flowers and healthy plants. If you have an adversarial relationship, which frankly most people have in their relationships, if you listen to people, you hear it, they feel like there's a conflict of interest between them and their boss, and them and their colleagues, and them and their employees, and them and their spouse, and them and their children. An adversarial relationship is a relationship of ill will, where you feel like you have to look out for your own interests at the expense of the other person because there appears to be a conflict of interest. And I'm going to give you a very simple example of that because it's not an obvious example. That's what I like about it. Linda and I were working with a couple, and they had conflict over finances, and the man felt like the woman, his wife, was a spendthrift, would just spend everything if she had the opportunity. And the wife thought that the husband was cheap. He was stingy. So the man would keep an eye on his wife's spending, and the wife would find ways to spend money where it wasn't easily detected. Okay? And it's a perfect example of an adversarial relationship because they were using the intelligence behind life that Michael so elegantly talked about to feather their own nest and to protect themselves from the other person. And that escalated over time. It's like people picking up weight over time. The bad will accumulated over time. And that was, it was like their soil was really bad and it was growing weeds. And most relationship programs or therapy are weed-killing programs. They don't really understand about the soil and the goodwill. Now, another way of saying this is the major problem in the world about relationships is people are unhappy in some way. They feel anxious, they feel depressed, they feel dissatisfied. They don't know how to get out of that feeling, and they attribute that feeling to the person that they're with. And that's where the bad will comes in. So it goes from I'm unhappy to they're making me unhappy. And when people feel that the other person is a victim of the other person, they get bad will, they get adversarial, and they start looking out for their own purposes. So that's what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about what that looks like and how to get out from under it.
So I have a story. I first have to get rid of this cough. So, about going from bad will to goodwill. I was very lucky in that I was able to meet and become the student of and the friend of Sydney Banks years ago. In fact, it was the end of the first year that George and I were together as a couple. We'd only been together really less than a year.
Yeah.
And we had met Sid and we were learning from him. But when we met him, I was really thinking about getting out of my relationship with George. I was thinking of breaking it off because it just wasn't any fun anymore. All we did was argue. And it wasn't fun arguing all the time. So I happened to be sitting with Sid at a table having lunch in a restaurant in Salt Spring Island in Canada, British Columbia. And I said to Sid, I don't really understand my relationships with men. I get with them. It's really good for a while. And then all of a sudden it turns bad. It's no fun. And I don't understand. And to be honest, I'm kind of thinking that I'm going to have to go ahead and give up on relationships and just be a single person because it's not worth it. Getting involved with somebody and then all of a sudden it just doesn't work. And he said, well, the feeling of being together, at the beginning? I said, yeah. He says, what is that feeling? I said, that feeling is the feeling of joy and enjoyment. It's like it's really, really fun when you first get together and you meet and there's this spark, and you just really feel grateful that you met the person and you just really love them and you feel so close and everything is just bright light. I said, I know that feeling. I said, but that feeling's gone now. It left. He says, well, yeah, I know, but remember that feeling? I said, yeah. He says, do more of that now. Do more of that feeling now. I couldn't understand what he meant. I couldn't understand what he was saying. it didn't connect. It's like, do more of that feeling that's gone now? He said, yeah. So I was very puzzled by it, and I just kind of ignored it. And I got up after lunch, and I left the restaurant, and I was walking to my car. I had one of those moments that Michael talked about. It was like one of these. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's what happens to me. It's I lose my good feeling, and then I saw why. I saw how. I had this just picture in my mind of how I went from really enjoying George to starting to look to see what was wrong with him and criticize him too much. It was like I went from here, this is really fun being with this man, we're just having such a good time, and I really like this about him, and I really like that about him, to, yeah, but he could be better if he would fix this and fix that, and he's kind of scattered, he gets distracted, he leaves things around, it's just, he seems insensitive sometimes, and
I think this is enough description. I think you've made your point.
Well, you know how I like to make the point and get it really clear and
Yes.
beat it to death.
And beat it to death, yeah.
So but see, I didn't know that I'd done that. I didn't know that in my mind, I didn't know I'd traveled from this feeling of just looking at what was right to looking at what was wrong. I didn't know that had happened until that conversation with Sid when he said, do more of this feeling. I just saw how I gotten there, and how I gotten there was through thinking critically too much. It was just too much. And so I saw that, and once I saw it, it was so easy for me to go from here to here. In other words, I didn't just, it was so easy for me to go from here to here. In other words, I just started going back to the feeling of enjoying him and just not thinking about what was wrong. And I could do that. I could do that because I saw that that's what created the failure in my relationship. It was a failure of feeling. Nobody really wants to be in a relationship where there's no feeling or a bad feeling. You want to be in a relationship where there's good feeling, or as George talks about, goodwill. And it's easy to do if you understand how it happens, and it happens through thought. Now for me, it was critical thought, and people have different versions of that, different versions of thinking that creates a loss of feeling, a loss of goodwill.
Like for me, it wasn't critical thought. It was what Michael said. It was just too much thought. I was so caught up in my own thinking and in my own life and what I was up to at work and all that, that I had very little bandwidth for the relationship. So I was, rather than feeling dissatisfied, I just felt distracted. I just didn't have a good, my feelings were overridden by all the thinking I was doing about my life.
The next insight I had about relationships and thinking, once I was able to move over here more often, it wasn't that, things happened between us, like we were really good at arguing. So we would, I'm right, you're right, kind of conversations. No, you don't see it right, I see it right. So we'd argue. And in that arguing kind of mentality, we'd lose the feeling of goodwill. Well, for whatever reason, that scared me. The fact that we would get contentious, or we would kind of take a position or take different sides and argue. And what I realized that I was doing, it was so simple. Instead of just having the argument and getting over it and seeing it as the past, just something that happened in the past and I could forget about it, I would count them. I would keep track of them. In my thinking, I was like, well, if you have too many arguments, should you be with that person? And I realized it just made up that thinking. I could have as many arguments with him as I wanted. I didn't have to leave him. And I didn't have to remember them, and I didn't have to count them. And what happened is that as we, of course, when you feel better about each other, you don't have as many arguments, but we still did. But I learned to just take them with a grain of salt. I don't know if you know that expression, a grain of salt, is not take them seriously. So that we would have arguments when they would just end and then I would just forget about it. Because I realized I didn't have to remember it.
You know, if I look back at that, if I had a graph of our relationship, it would look something like this. It would go up like that, and then it started to slip down, and then it started to go back up. Now, at this point here, where it started to go back up, was that conversation that Linda had with Sid over coffee. That is it got continuously better from that point forward. And we've been together for what, 40 years or something like that?
Almost.
Yeah, almost 40 years. So it's gotten better every year. And it looks to me like there was some shift in the direction, the intent that we had, what we were up to, that came out of that conversation and subsequent conversations that I had with Sid. So it was like the ship was turned in a different direction. Now the reason I bring that up is because we still had the same dramas and the same, bad habits relationship-wise. My tendency to get distracted, Linda's tendency to get critical. We still had the same conflicts about those things. We see a lot of couples over the years, and we can relate to every problem that every couple comes in with, a jealousy and fear of the way the other person's acting. And so everything that our relationship was the same as it was before in that sense, but we were committed to a different direction.
And we were committed to a direction of goodwill. Now, I didn't know you could do that within my mind. Like, I don't know why I didn't know that, but I didn't realize that that was the answer to any relationship, whether it was a primary relationship, a marriage, or a relationship with a child, or a relationship with an employee, or a relationship with a boss. You can have a commitment to goodwill. It's just a philosophical position within your own mind. And it's like an anchor, because when you feel the bad will, you go, oh, I need to address this. Need to make this right. Now, from a principle-based understanding, how you make it right is you just jump your own thinking. It's like you get over it in your own mind. You get over the bad experience in your own mind. You get over the bad will within your own mind. And people could see, I didn't know you could do that either. That was an insight. I can get over things. I can get over experiences, particularly if I own them and I don't blame him for them. Because one of the things that Sid talked about the difference between thought and circumstance, between thought and the outside world. Because if you're looking at the outside world to cause your experience, then it's like you got to change the outside world to feel better. And that's what I was doing prior to my understanding of the three principles, or prior to my meeting Sid, is I was trying to get him to be different so I could feel better. Well, if you would only, not put your arm like that, but, put your arm over here, and then I could feel better. Well, if you could just look different, no, not that expression, the other one.
Yeah.
Then or if you could just say it in the right way instead of the way you said it, or if you could not say that, if you could stand like. So it was all about my trying, honestly, to fix him, and he was doing the same to me, not as much. But I was trying to fix him so I could have the right feeling. Well, what I realized is that I could fix my own thinking and have the right feeling. And what I mean by fix my own thinking is get over it, let it go, not take it so seriously. Understand, the one thing that really helped me is the understanding that people live in separate realities made up of their own personal thought system. I'm going to say that again. I didn't know, it's another thing I didn't know. People live in separate realities made up of their own ability to think them up in their own unique way. So George thought differently than I did. See, I thought he should think the way I thought. And it was just a mistake on his part that he didn't think the way I thought. So I had to teach him to think the way I thought. Because I didn't understand that people lived in their own separate realities, their way of seeing and experiencing life through the power of thought. You make it up. People make it up differently. And it's not a right or wrong thing. And see, I had it in a right or wrong thing. My reality is right and your reality is wrong. How arrogant of me. But I started to appreciate that he thought up life different. And I started to appreciate that everybody thought up life different. Now, that was huge because I could have my own way, he could have his own way. And if his way disturbed my thinking, I could look to see how to address it within here, right? Rather than trying to make him sit differently. That's just a metaphor, but does that make sense to people?
Before we learn the principles of mind, consciousness, and thought, we didn't have the tools, we'll say, or the capacity to head towards goodwill very well, because we didn't know how to get over the bad feelings that we had. So if I had a bad feeling about Linda because I didn't like the way I was treated, or she had a bad feeling about the way she was treated, or if she was dissatisfied, or if I was anxious, we didn't know how to get over ourselves. We didn't know how to get out from under that. We just didn't have enough understanding of how the mind works. Now, when we met Sydney Banks, and we started to understand the nature of thought, the fact that thought was transitory by nature, that whatever you were experiencing, it was like New England weather. If you don't like it, wait a minute. That people will naturally get over their bad feelings, their painful feelings, if they look in that direction, if they take responsibility for it. So if I take responsibility for the fact that I'm upset with Linda because of something she did, and I understand that that's coming from me and my thinking, that thinking will not last forever. It will have a shelf life. It will exist, and then it will leave. Okay? And knowing that, we weren't afraid of our bad feelings, our painful feelings. We knew that they were just temporary. And we knew that they didn't mean anything about our relationship. They just was something that was happening inside our minds. And as soon as we got over it, that was it for us. It didn't have any significance. I'm going to give you an extreme example of that. Okay, Linda and I were coming back from England, and we were both not feeling well and really tired, and we were both kind of cautious about not getting into it and not, getting upset with each other. And even though we were cautious, we did. we got into it, and both of us remember it differently as to who started it. But it actually was Linda that started it. So we started being critical of who knows what, just anything we could possibly think of. And it spiraled down to the point where Linda said, I think that my marrying you was the worst mistake I ever made. I could have done a lot better, and I kind of jumped into it, and you didn't treat me very well at the beginning, and I should have left at that time. Now, the thing is, she could have passed the lie detector test, because she meant that. She meant what she was saying. Mm-hmm. And I responded in kind. Mm-hmm. And it got really nasty in that car. Linda talked about separate realities. Well, we were in a reality of major hostility and conflict mm-hmm. of a couple, okay? And then Linda said, to her credit, aren't you glad that we know what we know? It was gone. There was no need for apology. We saw it as a cognitive nightmare that we had. It was kind of like a daymare, if you will. So both of us saw it as a meaningless nightmare, and we woke up from the nightmare, and that was it. And we didn't have to talk about it, and it drew us closer because we realized that our relationship and our understanding could support even that extreme experience of difficulty.
And the thing is, that's the kind of experience where people go to the divorce lawyer the next day. I mean, that's what gets people that really intense, harsh feeling of conflict is what gets people to go to an attorney and look for a divorce. But we knew that we didn't have, even though our feeling had really dropped and we got into conflict, we knew we didn't have to take it seriously, that it would pass, and it did. It was like it passed in a second. Like we had like 5 minutes of this intense conflict, and I went, wait a minute, it's just thought. Just got caught up in some really bad thinking, and we don't have to take it seriously.
And one of the things about the principles that the thing that I heard the first time I listened to Sydney Banks, I was sitting in a lecture. I'd never met the man or heard about or saw the man before, and I went to a lecture, and he was talking about these principles, the nature of life, and all that. And what occurred to me, I don't know whether he said this, but what occurred to me, what made sense to me was that there was an illusory nature to our experience. Things weren't as they appeared. And I began to see that it must be that way because our experience changes. It's like a kaleidoscope. Experience changes. It's a very transitory. And I thought, if it's transitory like that, it must not be ultimately real. It must just be made up in some way, a version of imagination. I got that on the very first time I talked to him. Okay? Now, as Linda and I learned together and got a deeper understanding of this, we saw our thinking the way we see dreams at night. It's just temporary realities that we go through. What we were interested in as a permanent thing, as a constant, was getting back to the joy that Linda mentioned, the goodwill, the feeling of affinity. And the other thing we learned from the principles was that that was the natural feeling. That's why all young kids are that way so much of the time. The natural feeling was the joy that Linda felt and I felt when we were first together. That's what's natural with human beings, okay? In order to feel badly about a human being, in order to feel goodwill, you have to actually make that up in your head through your thoughts. But once those thoughts leave, you return automatically to the goodwill and the good feeling and the love. And that's what happened to Linda and I in the car. It took like a tenth of a second for us to get the good feeling back.
And laugh about it.
And laugh about it, yeah. We were both on the way home. I remember we were right at the Lacona exit. We were amazed.
No, actually, we weren't at the Lacona exit.
We weren't?
No. See, we're starting here. We were at the Highway 20 bridge.
We were?
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
No, that's just my memory, but I could
Yeah,
be wrong. In other words,
that's true. You could be
yeah.
wrong. That's true.
So could you.
That's true too. So when we
That's what we do.
when we were driving home from the Route 20 bridge
Or the Lacona exit.
or the Lacona exit, we were thinking about the creativity of mind, of the intelligence behind life, that we were able to conjure up all those memories and make such a case for the fact that we made a mistake getting married. So now that is creative thinking, that we've been together, we've been happy together for all those years, we love each other, we both want to have a spouse, we want to have someone to love. And it really is a testament to the creativity of the human mind that in 15 minutes we could make a case and believe that we should get a divorce. Isn't that amazing that we as human beings can be that resourceful, that we can make up an argument like that? That's amazing.
You know, I loved what Michael said about, we're seeing our thinking that it's a projector. You talked about the projector and that we're seeing, and the film is our thinking and it's coming from the inside out. Well, I started having experiences like that with George, and that when before our relationship, or as our relationship was flipping from bad to good, it was like he would look a certain way to me when I felt bad, and then when I felt good, he'd look a different way. And I realized that it was my habitual thinking, which is just memory. Habitual thinking is just memory. It was on my eyeball. So when I was in a bad feeling, it's like I was seeing my memories of him. And I realized that it was just the past coming into the now, and I was looking through the eyeballs of my past experiences with him. And I saw I didn't have to do that. Now, sometimes it would happen, but I knew I didn't have to take it seriously. I didn't have to do anything about it. I could just leave it alone, and it would pass. I thought that was so interesting. And then I started to see how I would live in the past thinking about George that would be disturbing or give me a bad feeling. Or I could just leave it alone, and then all of a sudden we'd be together enjoying each other, and the past would be gone. So interesting, the idea that you look, or I look so much through the habits of the past. I thought.
Now, I want to make another point and give a business example, because I know there's a lot of people who are, would like to know about business relationships. The insight that anybody can get over their bad feelings just by knowing where they come from, knowing that they're just thought, and knowing that thought is transitory, was key in our relationship, and it was key in the consulting that we did with businesses. So let me give you a perfect example. I was in a guy's office. He was like a vice president of a defense contractor. And he said to me, well, George, I need your help. I have this employee. He's an engineer. He's a brilliant guy from MIT, but he's not treating his people well, and I've got to go in and talk to him. But I find that he's very resistant to feedback. I mean, he gets defensive in a hurry. Okay, now, I'm interested in how much goodwill this guy has towards that employee, because it tells me how well their talk is going to go. See what I'm saying? So if you have a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is a huge amount of goodwill, good feeling and appreciation and respect, and a 1 is, you can't stand the sight of the person. In order for him to talk to this person, if this person is as defensive as he's saying, he's got to be a 9 or a 10. If he's less than a 9 or a 10, he's going to find himself in the same old routine of him being overbearing, the other person being defensive. You with me so far? So I said to him, well, Bill, how do you feel about Michael? Like, do you think he's a valued employee, or do you think he's not such a valued employee? He says, well, I don't think he's very good, George. That's what I'm telling you. He's problematic. He's dragging things down. I said, now, do you think he's doing as well as he can? Do you think he's just hampered, or do you think he just doesn't care? He says, oh, that's easy. He doesn't care. He absolutely doesn't care. He just doesn't care about the big picture. All he cares about is himself. I said, now, Bill, would it surprise you if I suggested that he would not respond well to the way you feel about him? He says, yeah, but I wouldn't tell him that. See? I said, well, just if you feel that way, you're not going to come off as warm and understanding and respectful. You're going to come off as tight and tense and critical. And that's going to be difficult for him. He says, well, how can I feel like he's doing a lousy job and still feel warmly towards him, and still feel respectful towards him. Now that's where the principles is incredibly valuable in businesses. Because all he has to do is get over those bad feelings, and he'll return to that natural feeling of affinity and respect. Now, does that mean that he doesn't have to go in and talk to the guy and tell him that he's doing a lousy job? No, that's his job to do that. Like if you're a parent and your kid needs guidance, it's your job to do the guidance. And the only thing is, you have to get over the bad feeling you have so that you can be in a better position to think well when you're with your child, and for the child to be more receptive. And that was the same thing with this guy and his employee. So he said to me, well, do you think I can just get over it? I said, yeah, if you just understood that it's coming from you and you had a desire to get over it, the rest of it would take care of itself. Well, it turns out he came back to me and at the lunch counter, because I was eating lunch in the company, and he says, you know, George, I got over it very soon after I went out in the office, and I asked myself, do I really have to talk to him about his work? Because it had gotten distorted in my mind. He looked a lot worse than he really was because of my bad feeling. And I decided that I needed to. So I went and I talked to him, and he said, you must have talked to him. I said, what do you mean? Well, he was very receptive. He really listened closely to what I was saying and took it to heart. So that's what you call getting over yourself and returning to the goodwill. And before that, he was seeing himself with conflict of interest with this employee, Mike, because Mike didn't, in his mind, Mike didn't care about the company, and he did, and that was a conflict. But he found out that Mike, like the other employees, did care about the company. He just was caught in his own devices.
Do you guys have any questions?
Yeah.
Because we can, talk more about anything that we've already talked about with regard to, goodwill and getting over your thinking.
This section of the program is Stump the Semi-Professionals.
So anything you want to know?
Yeah, someone out in the back there. Let me see if I understood what you said. You said it was your understanding that thought is neutral, and that it's us that convert it into good thought and bad thought.
Yeah. So, how do we do that?
What do you mean? How do we convert them?
Yes. Is it because of our own experience of life that we attach to the neutral thought, or is there something else going on?
Well, I have a really good example of that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Do you want to? Well, like when I met George, I had a habit, a relationship to the experience of fear. Just the experience of having a fearful thought. Mm-hmm. I thought it was wrong to have a fearful experience. Like if I felt fear, I thought it was wrong. Mm-hmm. So I would get very upset if I got frightened because it was wrong. Mm-hmm. Now, when I met George, I was a swimmer, and I didn't know that he wasn't. Mm-hmm. So I said, we were driving and we drove past this lake. I said, let's swim across the lake. He says, great. So we get out, we swim across the lake. We're in the middle of the lake, and he starts going under. He starts drowning. And fortunately, there was a log not too far from where we were. There was a log floating in the middle of the lake. I swam over, got the log, moved the log back to him, put him on the log, and swam him to shore. And I said, "What's the deal with you? How come you swam? You're not that good of a swimmer. Why would you swim across the lake?" He says, "I would never let fear stop me from doing anything." And I went, "Seriously?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "You were frightened?" He said, "Yeah." "But you would go ahead anyway?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, that's the difference between you and me." I have all of this additional thinking around and judgment around the experience of fear, and you just like won't even look at it. You won't even acknowledge it within your it's how he didn't care that he had an experience of fear. He was on one end of the continuum, I was on the other.
And it illustrates that there's a thin line between courage and the stupidity.
Yeah, well, that too.
It illustrates that point.
No, there was that too.
Yeah.
But I so went, "Oh my goodness, that is so different from me. That is so cool. That you're really uncomfortable and you don't mind. And I'm really uncomfortable and I mind." And it was just how we took our experience, how we took it. Does that answer you? I know that's kind of an extreme example, but does that
It
answer?
interests me, but it doesn't answer the question
Oh.
that I was trying to ask.
Well, ask it again, and we'll take another shot at it. See if we can do it till we get it right.
The premise is that thought is neutral,
Yes, it is.
and the reality is that all of us have happy thoughts, joyful thoughts, and I guess all of us have sad thoughts and uncomfortable thoughts. So something is going on to convert what starts as neutral into having a very clear color.
Okay.
A color of bright color or a dark color.
I know what you're asking. When I was in the Army, I was in a communication center, and they had pneumatic tubes, and you would send messages throughout the Pentagon. I was in the Pentagon building, which is the main defense building in Washington, D.C. And you would take the tube and you'd put a message in, and then you'd send it to wherever it was intended. Now, thought being neutral is like we all have these pneumatic tubes. Okay? Our free will is what message we put in those tubes, what specific thoughts we put in those tubes. And the only place that the metaphor breaks down is, as Michael suggested, every tube is sent back to us. You see? So we are the recipient of our own thinking, and it's brought to life via the senses, and that's where the feeling comes from. So every time we put a message in the tube, that message carries with it a feeling picked up by the senses, and the pneumatic tube comes back to us, and we experience that feeling. Now, what we're telling you is, if you can just understand that you sent out that message, it would protect you from the ravages of your own thinking. It's when it looks like the message was sent by a terrorist or an enemy that people have problems. So when Linda and I feel bad towards the other person, which happens to us every day, we feel bad at some point, and our only intent is to get over ourselves, to get over that bad feeling. And as soon as we do, the natural state of love comes in. Our relationship cannot accumulate any bad will whatsoever, because it's refreshed every time we get over it, and every time we remember that it doesn't matter that we had that bad feeling at 4:10 in the afternoon. Now, the bad feeling is what both of us are putting in our pneumatic tubes, and that's coming back to us. The specific thought is that's our input into it. The system of pneumatic tubes, the system of every thought coming to the senses, that's neutral. We have nothing to do with that. The fact of mind, the fact that we have this intelligence and thoughts come to mind out of the blue, we don't have anything to do with that either. The only thing we have to do with is understanding the nature of the system. And that allows us to innocently put really, really bad thoughts and feelings into the pneumatic tube, have it come back to us, and not have it take on a life of its own. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah.
Now that answers it probably, right?
Thank you.
Good. I told you if we had enough opportunities, we'd get it right. Any other questions? We have time for one more question. Well, maybe we'll just sum it up, because we only have a few minutes to go.
Oh, there's a question here.
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, George. I suppose it's just something that I'm curious about. So there's a very common societal belief that there's a right person. So to what extent do you believe that actually you could be happily married to anybody?
Well, that would be an awkward question for me to answer.
Well, in theory, you could, because you just have to get over yourself.
See, the way I see it is, if I were married to someone other than Linda, which would be a terrible thing in my mind, but if I was married to someone...
Good one. See, now he's acting right.
Yes,
right? Behaving properly.
It would bring out a different George Pransky. You see, that's what would happen. So certain traits that are really, nice traits maybe, in our relationship, wouldn't be as prevalent. So I would be a different person, and the person that was with me would be affected by each other. But given that everybody is lovable, and everybody is enlightened and kind of deep down is made up of joy and love, I see no reason whatsoever that anybody couldn't be with anybody. It's only their ability to get over themselves that would determine how well the relationship worked out. And if one person was a very poor functioning person, let's say they would get better and better over time. If the other person didn't drop down there and didn't become more like them, they get better and better because this person that's down has just as much health as this person, and they would gravitate in that direction. It's a good thing that we're basically filled with love and joy and goodwill, because we don't have to, that's stronger than bad will. It's stronger than conflict. Well, we're just under the wire. It's funny. I keep looking at that clock. It's becoming obsessive compulsive about the clock. But we'd like to thank you all for your rapt attention, and we hope that this is helpful. This is really nice for us to be able to talk about our journey together as a couple and all the things we've learned.
And the thing is, once you see the path to good relationships as goodwill and get committed to it, it makes relationships so easy.
It'll change immediately.
Yeah.
And if you learn the more you understand the principles, the easier it is to get over yourself. And that's the only challenge to moving towards goodwill, is getting over
yourself. Yeah.
Getting over yourself.
And people can if they want to. You have to want to. You know, like sometimes, like I don't want to get over feeling bad about George, and it's like, you can do it, I know, but I don't want to. You can do it, no, but I don't want to. So it's just a matter of having that commitment, and you can.
And you know what Linda does sometimes? This is great. I'll get uncharacteristically mad at her, see. And uncharacteristic in that it'll last a while. And she'll notice, wow, I haven't, because I usually get over things really fast. Gee, he's taking a while to get over this. She'll say to me, George, are you going to get over this? I said, I don't know. It's pretty bad what you did there. She said, I know, but are you ultimately going to get over this and get back to where we were before we had that argument? And I will look at my commitment to goodwill and I say, yeah, I am. And then she'll say to me, are you going to get over it as fast as you can? And I'll say, yeah, I'll get over it as fast as I can. So if we ever doubt it, we ask each other that. And that seems to reinforce our confidence in the marriage.
Yeah.
All right, well, have a wonderful day. You have tremendous speakers coming up, so we're privileged to be a part of what's going on here.